So we're pleased to welcome Dr. Gary Kohn, pediatric pulmonologist with Summit Medical Group. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Kohn. If you could just start by sharing a little bit about yourself and your practice.
Thank you for having me. So I'm a pediatric pulmonologist at Summit Medical Group, and I see primarily children with lung difficulties, asthma, breathing difficulties, and with recent events, seeing a lot of children with concerns about injury to vaping.
So what is EVALI? We've heard a lot about this in the news lately. What is it?
So EVALI is an acronym that came out from the CDC, which stands for e-cigarette or vaping associated lung injury, and is related to the rash of acute lung injury that we started to see this summer, where people were being hospitalized for acute lung injury, respiratory failure, and death.
What are we seeing in e-cigarettes, in cartridges? What are the chemical compounds that are found?
That's an excellent question, because we're not quite sure for all of the cartridges. Obviously, any of the commercial products that are being promoted by the companies are primarily nicotine products dissolved in solutions that may or may not be good for you. And then there is what we sort of refer to as the black market cartridges, which are THC, cannabinoid, and whatever the street people want to put in those cartridges. So that is probably our biggest concern, is that people really have absolutely no idea what they're vaping and inhaling into their lungs.
So is it safe to say that what's in cartridges is not just flavoring or not just vapor? There's other things that are included?
Yeah, so obviously nicotine's in it, the THC, the cannabinoid, and whatever this is dissolved in, but we don't know what it is. You know, what I try to tell all my patients, because they want to ask, is it safe, is let's face it, your lungs like air, the same way fish like pure water. So I don't care if you're vaping THC, cannabinoid. A decade ago, everybody was going to hookah bars, smoking dandelions, and they thought that was safe, but it's still foreign material going down into the lung, creating injury that you don't need to do.
Mm-hmm. And is there a way to reverse the effects of vaping on the lungs?
I think that it's too early in the process to know what kind of injury and damage is occurring. We know that steroids have been used in EVALI for people that have significant lung injury, and they're seeing benefit from it. And that may protect them from the acute process, but we still don't know what the long-term effects of that vaping products and that disease process. And I think that the story will probably play out pretty similar to cigarettes, where 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, we're going to see the effects of long-term injury on the lungs for people that partook in this on a pretty consistent basis.
So it sounds like there's just a lot of question marks across the board with vaping. So this next question is probably going to be difficult to answer as well, but is vaping better or worse than cigarettes? Is there a clear-cut answer to that?
I alluded to earlier, nothing foreign down in the lungs is good for you. I know that there's lots of people saying that vaping is safer than cigarettes. I think it's just swapping one evil for another, and it's a question of which one's going to get you first.
Do you have to vape every day to become addicted to it?
I think that's unclear as to what you're vaping. So we know nicotine is an addictive agent. So obviously, the more exposure you have to the nicotine, the higher likelihood that you're going to become addicted. I think every person has their own threshold as to how much they have to be doing until they become addicted and have a harder time getting off those products. Most of the kids that I've seen in my practice, though, have really been more recreational vaping. Vast majority are doing it one or two times on the weekends at parties and not consistently doing it during the week. So I think those children or students are probably easier to stop if they want to. The few that I've had that are smoking multiple pods in the course of a day, every day of the week, are going to struggle more with the possible addiction if it's a nicotine product.
Okay, so talking about what you're seeing currently with your patients, is that something that is prevalent right now? Are you seeing vaping?
So my asthma patients all claim not to be vaping, which is good because they associate already having a bad lung problem. Mm-hmm. But I am seeing a lot of students showing up to be evaluated for possible injury to their lungs because they know they've been vaping, and after watching what's happening in the media, are concerned. And the vast majority of them have not shown any obvious lung injury, but we're not looking at their lungs from a microscopic level. We're looking at it as a gross function. Do they move as much air as they're supposed to? And I think that if there's long-term injury, it's not going to be on that gross level. It's going to be on that microscopic level 10, 15, 20 years down the road of whether or not these, compounds are precancerous for that risk. Are they going to destroy lung tissue at a faster rate so they have less lung function when they're older? What I try to explain to the students is that it's very common for kids to get away with a lot of stupid behaviors at a young age because their body's young and there's a lot of reserve. What they don't understand is you pay on the tail end. And everybody loses lung function over the course of their life. So if you knock off at 30% at 16, 17, you may not notice it unless you're an elite athlete or doing high-end exercise, but you may be missing that 30% when you're 60 or 70 years of age. And as we all know, adolescents have a hard time looking that far down the road.
So it sounds like the patients are coming in sort of as a preventative measure. If they've been vaping, they just want to make sure that their lungs are clear, that they're okay. And the hope would be that they stop if they are if they are vaping, that they're going to stop at that point once you tell them that you're not quite seeing the effects yet. Is there an age range that you're seeing with vaping? Is it mostly, I know you're a pediatric pulmonologist, is it mostly middle school students, high school students? Is it across the board?
So most of what I'm seeing are the high schoolers that are worried about it. But I think, they're old enough to see the media and understand it. So they put it together. I ask all my 12-year-olds and up about vaping, anybody that's in middle school, at the visits. Very few of them are admitting to personally doing it, but they all seem to know people that are. We know that the data is somewhere between 11 and 30% of middle school and high school have at least tried it. So it falls into that range probably in what I'm seeing in the office.
And a lot of what we hear now with the work that the coalition is doing, we work with schools, we work with parents, we work with community members, especially with the student assistance counselors at the middle school and high school level. We hear that students want to stop now. They've been vaping for a period of time, maybe for a year, maybe for less than that, and they're noticing the effects on their lungs and they want to stop. What's your advice to somebody who has identified that they want to quit?
Most of them truly are most likely not truly addicted. So it's just a matter of going that cold turkey, having the willpower to do it, and just stopping. The ones that are truly addicted, the ones that are using the nicotine products on a high level, may need assistance of care providers with nicotine alternatives, sort of patches, counseling. I think the kids that are in that category may have other issues going on besides just the use of nicotine. Those are the kids that tend to have other high-risk behaviors, anxiety, other things that are going on in their life that led them to that point. The other part that has always been big in this age group is peer pressure, right? I had one kid the other day said he wants to stop, but all his friends do it, his girlfriend does it, and I said it's okay to hang out with them and not do it. The question that comes up is a lot about the secondhand vaping. And again, we don't know what the effects are. The vaping cloud may not be as large as traditional cigarettes, but again, if it's getting into the lungs, not as good. But I said, you stand back. You don't have to participate. And I tell them that we have things that show that students can do this, right? I don't want to pick on my age, but when I was younger, drinking and driving was common amongst adolescents. It's not as common because we've educated these kids. They've understood the concept of being a designated driver. So why not be a designated non-vapor for the party? And those are the kind of conversations that I think you could have with the kids and talk about that it's okay. You don't have to do everything that the kid next to you does.
So that leads perfectly into our last question. And just talking about Night of Conversation, and the main idea behind the initiative is for parents and teens to be able to talk about these things, substance use, mental health, openly, and to just start this conversation. So my last question for you, in your opinion, how can a family start the conversation around vaping at home?
I'm a open door policy type of guy. I just come straight out and ask them. And the truth is, some kids will lie to their parents about it. Some will be open. A lot of it depends on your initial parenting style. I sort of have the philosophy that I tell my kids that honesty is the best approach. And that if you're honest with us as parents, that the repercussions are going to be less if they tell us up front, and this is vaping or any other activities, than if we find out from other sources. Because ultimately, as parents, our goal is to protect our children. And part of this is just education. And I think to the parents, you got to say, hey, even if you ask the kids and deny it, what I do in my office with the kids is say, hey, without you telling me the truth or not, I want you to have the take-home message, which is vaping is not safe. So if you're doing it, stop. If you're thinking about it, don't. Find another activity.
That's a perfect place to stop. Thank you so much, Dr. Kohn, for your help today and for all of the information that you shared. It's been very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So we're pleased to welcome Dr. Gary Kohn, pediatric pulmonologist with Summit Medical Group. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Kohn. If you could just start by sharing a little bit about yourself and your practice.
Thank you for having me. So I'm a pediatric pulmonologist at Summit Medical Group, and I see primarily children with lung difficulties, asthma, breathing difficulties, and with recent events, seeing a lot of children with concerns about injury to vaping.
So what is EVALI? We've heard a lot about this in the news lately. What is it?
So EVALI is an acronym that came out from the CDC, which stands for e-cigarette or vaping associated lung injury, and is related to the rash of acute lung injury that we started to see this summer, where people were being hospitalized for acute lung injury, respiratory failure, and death.